What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Almost 4 years into Russia's war in Ukraine, the Kremlin is trapped in a corner it refuses to admit exists. The battlefield consumes people at a rate modern Europe has not seen in generations, while the political system at home is too fragile to absorb another shock. Calling up hundreds of thousands of Russian men again would risk panic, capital flight, protests, and something the Kremlin fears way more than sanctions: loss of control. At the same time, the financial burden of paying even higher bonuses to volunteers is eating into budgets and distorting the economy. Wages inflate, regions struggle, and the illusion of stability cracks a little more every single month. So Vladimir Putin needed a workaround. Not a solution, not a peace, not a strategic breakthrough. No, just a simple workaround. Something what 99% of world leaders around the world would not have the guts to attempt. After all, many people still have moral compasses they follow. But if you completely ignore it, well, it really becomes that simple. And what he settled on was not subtle, humane or temporary. It was the expansion of global recruitment pipeline built on deception, coercion and desperation, stretching far beyond Russia's borders. This is not about ideology anymore, as you can see. It's about outsourcing human losses to people who have no voice, no protection, and no connection to the conflict itself. And once you see how this system works, it becomes clear why economic pressure alone does not stop the war. It mutates it. The Russian leadership has built its entire legitimacy on the idea of control. Control over territory, over society, over the future. But the war in Ukraine has steadily destroyed that image. Losses have mounted at a scale that forces constant replenishment, and that replenishment has become harder with every passing month. Official figures remain hidden in the Kremlin books, obviously. Demographic data quietly disappears, and even basic mortality statistics are suddenly treated like state secrets. Nobody is allowed to know this. That silence tells you everything you need to know. If the numbers supported the narratives, they would be broadcast non-stop, these numbers. Well, instead, the Kremlin relies on financial incentives to keep the system limping forward, offering bonuses that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Entire regional budgets are bent around recruitment targets, while factories, farms and construction sites quietly bleed workers. But there is, obviously, a ceiling to this strategy. At some point, money stops working. We already see it. Those willing to trade their futures for a payout, they have already done so. Those remaining either cannot afford to leave their families behind or simply don't believe in the promises anymore. And the one tool that could force compliance and other mass mobilization, well, it obviously remains impossible, but still kind of last case scenario. Because 2022 collapse triggered a wave of exits, panic and public anger that shook the system far more than the Kremlin ever anticipated. Repeating that mistake would be politically reckless for Putin. So the search began for people whose absence would not matter domestically. People whose names would not appear in Russian obituaries. People whose families would not protest in Moscow squares. Well, the answer was not new. It had been tested before, quietly and brutally, in the form of proxy forces, prison units and regional militias. What changed was scale. What had once been an auxiliary tactic evolved into global strategy. And that shift leads directly to the next layer of this system, where expendability becomes policy and borders become irrelevant, which is something we guys need to unpack further in the next chapter. When Russia's leadership realized it could no longer rely solely on its own population, it did not turn inward, it looked outward. Across the global south, economic hardship, weak institutions and limited oversight create fertile ground for predatory schemes. Men looking for work abroad are not chasing ideology or adventure, they're chasing simple survival. A stable income, a way out of debt, a chance to send money home, and that is exactly what Russia's recruitment network exploits. The promises are deliberately vague. Construction jobs, they say, warehouse work, security position, driving contracts, no frontline assaults, they say. Sometimes written in bold and in red ink. Anything, basically, that sounds ordinary enough to be believable. The recruitment rarely mentions Ukraine even outright, and when it does, it's framed as something distant, controlled and manageable. Yeah, you might work in Donbass, but, it's ours anyways, right? Ours. The paperwork is in Russian, the explanations are murky, the intermediaries are local, often sometimes even fellow countrymen who speak the same language and carry a familiar accent. And by the time reality becomes clear, the exit doors already closed shut. You sign it, you're gone. This system thrives because it operates in legal gray zones. Many of the countries affected are non-aligned or maintain pragmatic ties with Moscow. They don't do neither of those. Their governments may issue protests, but enforcements are weak and accountability dissolves across borders. Once someone signs a contract, willingly or not, their status becomes ambiguous. Are they workers? Are they volunteers, employees? Or maybe they are combatants, soldiers? Nobody knows. That ambiguity protects the architects of the system while trapping those inside it. What makes this especially effective for Moscow is that it shifts the human cost away from the Russian society. Casualties don't ripple through Russian cities. Funerals do not disrupt domestic narratives. Losses become invisible statistics tied to foreign names that never appear on state television. And why would they? It's just a brutal form of insulation. And it did not appear overnight. It grew out of earlier experiments with proxy forces, mercenary formations, and coerced participation. Which brings us to how this model was refined and normalized over time, something worth examining more closely in the next section. Long before foreign recruitment became central to sustaining the war, Moscow tested the logic of expendable manpower through intermediaries. Basically what it means is that regional militias, paramilitary formations, and private military structures all served as laboratories for a single idea: that war could be fought without visibly burning the core population. These forces were marked as elite, loyal, and fearsome, but their real value lay elsewhere. They were disposable. When losses mounted, the political cost remained manageable. That logic reached its most industrial form with mercenary structures and prison recruitment schemes. The message was simple and cruel, saying trade your future for a chance to survive. For a chance at reduced sentences, wiped records, quick money. And for a while it even worked. But even that pool proved to be finite. And once the novelty faded, the system required fresh inputs. Foreign recruitment filled that gap perfectly. Social media campaigns exploded in volume, targeting specific regions with tailored messaging. In some places, masculinity and honor were emphasized. In others, citizenship and debt relief. They did not say, however, that your citizenship may and most likely will be revoked because of the simplest mistakes and crimes, but anyways. In all cases, risk was minimized in the pitch and maximized in reality. Promises of non-combat roles dissolved the moment contracts were signed, as it usually happens with the Russian soldiers as well. Training lasted days, sometimes weeks at best, if you're lucky, before deployment to the most dangerous sectors. What emerges is a pattern of structured deception. This is not chaos or mismanagement, it's design. People are placed into situations where refusal carries consequences, such as deportation, detention, loss of legal status, like mentioned previously. Consent becomes a technicality. And because many of these individuals lack strong diplomatic backing, their cases disappear into bureaucratic voids. Who will help them? Come on. This system mirrors other forms of transactional exploitation, where victims are transformed into forced participants, intentionally complicating responsibilities and making rescue almost impossible. Because once you're trapped, they're both tools and shields, absorbing danger while protecting those who orchestrated the scheme. And that legal and moral fog is not accidental. It is the final layer of insulation that allows the entire structure to function, which is exactly what we need to address in our final chapter as we look at the broader consequences of this approach. What Russia has built is not just a recruitment network. It's a gray zone mechanism that operates below the threshold of clear accountability. By blurring the line between volunteer, migrant, and victim, Moscow creates a situation where responsibility is endlessly deferred. International law struggles to categorize those individuals. Diplomatic channels stall. Prosecutions rarely reach beyond the low-level intermediaries. At the same time, this strategy aligns perfectly with Russia's broader approach to conflict. Ambiguity is a weapon. Plausible deniability is a shield. Whether it's sabotage, information warfare, or recruitment, the goal is always the very same. achieve results without triggering decisive responses. Foreign losses do not enrage Russian public opinion. They do not destabilize domestic politics. They simply disappear into distant tragedies. But the impact is real. Families across Africa, Asia, Latin America, they do lose sons who never intend to take part in a European war. Communities are hollowed out by schemes they barely understand. Governments issue warnings, but, well, a little bit too late. And as economic pressure on Russia increases, the incentive to expand this pipeline grows rather than shrinks. Poverty becomes a resource. Desperation becomes leverage. This is the uncomfortable truth many prefer to avoid. Economic sanctions alone do not end war. They just reshape them. Countries affected, they do adapt. They push the cost outward into those least able to resist. And as long as this system remains profitable and politically convenient, it will, unfortunately, persist. Which leaves us with the unavoidable question of responsibility, and what it says about the future of this conflict, a question that needs to be answered. Russia's war in Ukraine is no longer sustained by patriotic enthusiasm or strategic clarity. It is sustained by systems designed to hide reality. By outsourcing human losses to the world's most vulnerable populations, the Kremlin preserves the domestic fiction of control while deepening a global moral catastrophe. This is not about whether Russia can keep fighting. It has shown that, unfortunately, it can, slowly, grinding thousands of people, not willing to back down any single meter or refute any single statement. All that possible as long as there are desperate people willing to believe a lie or forced into signing a document they do not understand, applicable both for Russians and non-Russians. For the global south, the lesson is brutal. Neutrality offers no protection when poverty becomes a weapon. In an era of gray zone warfare, vulnerability invites exploitation. And for the rest of the world, the cost of ignoring this system is measured not just in battlefield outcomes, but in human lives erased quietly, far from cameras, far from the debates, and far from accountability. The war continues not because it is sustainable, but because its true cause has been carefully displaced. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more just like this. If you wish to support our work, the links down below. For example, you can join our Patreon, and you will be able to see an additional chapter at the end of each episode. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.